I never thought I would be the kind of daughter-in-law who publicly humiliates her mother-in-law. But life sometimes throws up surprises that no etiquette book can handle. My name is Maya, I'm 32 years old, and as they say in my family, I've always been too calm. Perhaps that's why my mother-in-law thought she could do whatever she wanted with me. My mom is from Jamaica and my dad is a white American, so I grew up used to people sometimes staring at me a little longer than they should. But I learned to smile, to joke, to be the one to ease the tension. And when I met James, I thought I had finally found someone who saw me for who I was. He was kind, funny, and had these blue eyes that made my heart skip a beat. We got married 2 years later and I thought it was the beginning of something beautiful. But I didn't take into account his mom, Elizabeth. And damn it, I didn't know she would become a ticking time bomb in my life. James introduced me to Elizabeth a month after we started dating. I remember that day, a sunny Sunday afternoon at her house in the country. She was polite but cold as a winter wind. She smiled with thin lips, asked me about my work. I'm a freelance designer, and nodded as if she was listening. But then she said, "You are so exotic, Maya. Where are your parents from?" I felt a smile freeze on my face. Exotic? I explained about Jamaica and Ohio, but she had already turned her attention to James, patting his shoulder as if I were just a set piece. I gripped my fork a little harder and told myself I was exaggerating. Over time, these little things began to accumulate like dust in the corners. She called me Mai instead of Maya, even though I asked her not to shorten it. Once at a family barbecue, she made a joke. "You must be good at cooking spicy food, right?" and laughed as if it was a compliment. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, but James just waved his hand. "Mom, stop it." He didn't see a problem. And I didn't want to create one. I loved him, and for his sake, I endured her barbs, her stares, her way of talking to me as if I were a random guest in their perfect white family. But lately things have gotten worse. James and I have been married for 2 years, and Elizabeth started acting like I had stolen her son. She would call him every day, complain about her loneliness, ask him to come help with some stupid things like fixing the faucet or moving boxes. James would leave and I would stay at home, boiling with irritation. I tried to talk to him. One evening when he came back from her, I said, "James, she's acting like I'm not there. I don't like it." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "Maya, she's just old and lonely. You know how she feels about you." I bit my lip. Do I? Or is he blind? I could have lived with her coldness if not for that evening. It was an ordinary Thursday. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, flipping through orders. My phone rang, a message from Elizabeth. I was surprised because she rarely wrote to me directly. I opened it and the world stopped. James deserves better than this mixed-up girl. She thinks she can get into our family, but I won't let her. I blinked, reread it. My heart was pounding as if it wanted to break out of my chest. It wasn't for me. She had accidentally sent me what she was writing to someone else. My hands were shaking and the phone almost fell. I sat there in the dark, feeling anger and shame fighting inside. A mixed-up girl. That's what I was to her. Not her son's wife, not a person, but some dirty word. I imagined her sitting in her perfect house, typing this message with a cold smile. And the worst part was that she thought I would never find out. But I did. And it changed everything. I threw the phone on the couch and stood up. My legs were buzzing, my head was spinning. James was at work and I knew that when he got home I had to say something. But what? Would he believe me? Or would he say I was exaggerating again? I looked at myself in the mirror, brown skin, curly hair, eyes that were now burning with tears. I was not a victim. I was nothing more. It was the beginning of the end, not of my marriage, but of my silence. And I knew I had to do something to make sure she never forgot I was here. When I read that message from Elizabeth, everything in me screamed. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the phone as if it were a grenade about to explode. My fingers were shaking, my throat was so tight I could barely breathe. A mixed girl. These words cut into me like a blade and I felt shame and anger fighting for control. I couldn't believe she had written it, but at the same time I knew it was true. Everything that she had hidden behind her fake smiles and subtle quips was now lying before my eyes, naked and disgusting. And I couldn't just sit there and swallow it. James came home an hour later. I heard the keys jingle in the lock and he called out, "Maya, I'm home." in his usual cheerful voice. But I didn't answer. I was sitting on the couch holding the phone, and when he came into the room he saw my eyes. "What happened?" he asked, throwing his bag on the floor. I handed him the phone without saying a word. He took it, read it, and I saw his face change from surprise to something between shame and defense. "Is it from Mom?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "She accidentally sent it to me." He rubbed his temples and looked away. "Maya, I'm sure it's not what you think. She must have been annoyed, spilled it to someone." I didn't let him finish. "James, she called me a mixed-up girl. Do you see that? Do you hear how that sounds?" My voice was shaking, but I didn't stop. "She thinks I don't deserve you. And what, you're going to say I'm exaggerating?" He sighed, the same sigh I had heard 100 times when I tried to tell him that his mom was out of line. "She didn't mean it like that. You know how she can be." "Do I?" I felt my anger boiling, hot and uncontrollable. "No, James, I don't. I know that she's been treating me like a stranger for years. And now I see what she really thinks." He raised his hands as if in surrender. "Maya, I'll talk to her. It was stupid, she'll apologize." But I shook my head. Apologize? I didn't want her to apologize. I wanted her to feel the pain I was feeling right now. I wanted her to realize that I wouldn't just disappear as she had hoped. I went into the kitchen, leaving him standing there. I needed to think. Memories were spinning in my head, moments that I blamed on her old-fashionedness. How she asked me if my hair was real as if it were a joke. How she gave me a skin whitening cream for Christmas, saying, "I just thought you'd like it." I laughed at the time, hiding my resentment so as not to spoil James's mood. But now these little things added up to a picture, and I saw that it wasn't just rudeness. It was racism, cold and real, which she hid behind her perfect smile. I poured myself some water, but my hands were shaking so much that half of it spilled on the table. What should I do? Should I cry? Should I scream? Go to her and tear her house apart? I felt powerless, but at the same time I knew I couldn't just let it go. And then I got a call from Kira, my best friend. I answered, and she could immediately tell that something was wrong. "Maya, what's wrong? You sound like the world has ended." I exhaled and told her everything about the message, about James, about how I was drowning in this pain. Kira was silent for a second and then said, "She has crossed the line. You can't swallow this." I agreed but asked, "What can I do?" "She's his mom." Kira laughed sharply, angrily. "Oh, I know what I would do. I would print that message on a t-shirt and wear it to their family dinner. Let everyone see who she really is." I froze. A t-shirt? That sounded crazy. But the longer I thought about it, the more it felt right. Not to complain quietly, not to cry into my pillow, but to throw it in her face publicly, ruthlessly. I thanked Kira and sat down at my laptop. I found a website with custom t-shirts and opened the editor. My fingers buzzed as I typed her words. "James deserves better than this mixed-race chick." I chose a big bold font, red, so it would burn in my eyes. I ordered it, paid for rush delivery. James came into the kitchen, saw my screen and frowned. "Maya, what are you doing?" I looked at him and my voice was hard as a rock. Something I should have done a long time ago. I knew it would be a blast. But I was ready. Elizabeth thought she could crush me quietly. He was wrong. And she will soon realize it. The day of the family dinner came faster than I expected. The t-shirt arrived the day before, with bright red font on a black background and Elizabeth's words glowing like a neon sign. I held it in my hands, feeling my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. This was my chance. Not just to say it, but to show her, James, their entire family, that I would not be silent anymore. But when I put the t-shirt in my bag, I was overcome with doubts. What if it's too much? What if James can't take it? I brushed these thoughts aside. No more doubts. Today I'm taking control. James had been buzzing around me all morning, trying to defuse the tension. "Maya, can we just talk to her at home? There's no need to make a scene." I looked at him and my eyes must have said it all, because he fell silent. "She was making a scene when she wrote that," I said. He sighed but nodded. I knew he was torn between me and Elizabeth, between love and loyalty. But I could no longer wait for him to choose a side. I had to choose myself. We drove to her house in silence. I put on a regular sweatshirt over my t-shirt to hide it until the right moment. My hands were sweating, but I held my head high. Elizabeth's house appeared in front of us, white, perfect, with a manicured lawn as if from an advertisement. Voices were already buzzing inside: her sister, Elizabeth's husband, and several cousins. I took a breath and stepped over the threshold. Elizabeth greeted us with a big smile, hugged James, and nodded to me. "Maya, it's good to see you," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. I felt my stomach clench. She didn't know that I knew. Dinner began quietly. Everyone was sitting at a long table with fried chicken, potatoes, and pies. I sat across from Elizabeth, watching her laugh, pouring wine, playing the role of the perfect hostess. My pulse was accelerating with every passing minute. I was waiting. And when she stood up to make a toast, something about family and love, I felt it was now or never. I threw off my shirt, staying in that t-shirt. The red font flashed on my chest and the room froze. Elizabeth stopped in mid-sentence, her glass hanging in the air. Her eyes widened and her face turned white. "Maya, what is it?" she wheezed. I stood up, my voice shaking, but I kept it firm. "These are your words, Elizabeth. Your message. You wrote it about me." The silence became as thick as fog. They all turned to her, then to me. James lowered his head, his fingers tightening on his fork. Elizabeth's Aunt Margaret muttered, "What's going on?" I kept my eyes on my mother-in-law. Tell them what you think of me." She blinked, tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Maya, is this a joke? I don't understand." I stepped closer, my voice rising. "You wrote that James deserves better than me. That I'm a mixed girl who doesn't belong in your family. You sent it to me by accident, but I got it." The room exploded into whispers. Her father-in-law, Tom, frowned and looked at Elizabeth. "Liz, is it true?" She opened her mouth, but the words were stuck. Her face flushed, her eyes darted around. Then she tried to counterattack. "Maya, you're twisting things. It was private." I was annoyed. "It's not what I think." I laughed sharply, painfully. "Private? You called me a dirty word, Elizabeth. You treated me like trash for years and thought I'd keep quiet." James stood up, his voice quiet but intense. "Mom, tell me that's not true." She looked at him and I saw her mask crack. "James, I just want what's best for you. The best." The word hung in the air like a punch. Everyone was looking at her, Tom, Margaret, her cousins. No one was laughing, eating, breathing. I stood there, feeling my anger give way to a strange calm. I had done it. I had shown her for what she was. Elizabeth sat down, her hands trembling, her glass falling to the table, the wine spilling a red stain. I turned to James. "I'm going to the car. Are you coming with me or not?" He looked at me, then at my mom. A second stretched into eternity. Then he stood up and followed me. The door slammed behind us, but I knew it wasn't over. It was only the beginning of the storm. When James and I left Elizabeth's house, the air felt heavy as if before a thunderstorm. I got into the car, clenching my hands into fists to stop them from shaking. James got behind the wheel in silence, his face pale, his eyes staring off into space. The engine revved up and we drove away, leaving behind that table, that spilled wine stain, that shocked whisper of relatives. I felt both strong and broken. I had thrown the truth in her face. But what now? What did it mean for us? The drive home was quiet, but the silence screamed. I could see James gripping the steering wheel, his jaw tensing. Finally he spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Maya, why didn't you tell me about the t-shirt? You made me look stupid out there." I turned to him, my eyes narrowed. "Made you look stupid? James, your mom called me a slut behind my back. You saw her face, she didn't deny it." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "I know what she said and it's terrible. But you could have talked to me first." I felt the anger flare up again. "Talk to you?" I tried. "James, you always said I was exaggerating, that she wasn't like that. And now that I've proven what she is, you're mad at me." He didn't answer, just looked at the road. And in that silence, I realized that he didn't know how to choose between us. And that hurt more than her words. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I needed to be alone. The phone rang, a message from Tom, my father-in-law. "Maya, I didn't know. I'm ashamed of her. Let's talk tomorrow." I put the phone down without answering. Tom was a good man, but his words could not erase what had happened. Then Margaret, Elizabeth's aunt, called. She was in a panic. Maya, what have you done? Elizabeth is in tears, dinner is ruined. You shouldn't have done that. I hung up the phone. Her tears? What about mine? The next few days were a blur. Elizabeth disappeared, she didn't call, didn't write, as if she had fallen through the earth. James walked around the apartment like a ghost, avoiding my eyes. I worked, drank coffee, tried to live, but a storm was raging inside. What had I done? I wanted justice, but now everything was falling apart. Relatives began to put pressure. Margaret wrote again, "You have to apologize, Maya. This is a family, we make peace. Apologize." I almost smashed the phone against the wall. I was not going to apologize to a woman who hated me for who I was born. James finally spoke to me 3 days later. We were sitting in the kitchen and he looked exhausted. Maya, I don't know what to do. She's my mom, but what she said, it's wrong. I'm angry with her, but I don't want to lose you both. I looked at him and my heart was clenching. James, I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to see what she's been doing to me for years. You saw her reaction, she didn't apologize, she made excuses. He nodded, but his eyes were blank. I'll talk to her, he said. But I knew that was not enough. The next day came a call from James' cousin Ryan. He was blunt. Maya, you've split the family. Everyone is talking about it. You have to fix it. I laughed coldly, bitterly. Fix it? He called me a dirty word, Ryan. I'm not fixing it. He sighed. She's old, she doesn't think like that. I hung up the phone. Old? That's no excuse. And I was tired of listening to everyone defend her, as if it was my fault for revealing the truth. Elizabeth didn't show up. James called her, but she didn't pick up. I could see it eating at him, and part of me felt guilty. But a bigger part of me, the part that had put up with her stares and barbs for years, was happy. She was hiding because she knew she had lost. Her mask fell off and everyone saw who she was. But I knew it wasn't over. She would come back with an apology or with war, I didn't know. And I had to be ready. Because now I will not back down. The week after dinner dragged on like an eternity. Elizabeth was silent, as if she had been swallowed up by the earth, and that made it even worse. I waited for an explosion, call, a fight, something, but the silence gnawed at me more than her words could. James walked around the apartment like a lost dog, phone in hand, dialing her number over and over again. She didn't answer. And I could see it eating away at him. He loved her, but now he knew what she had done. Me. I stood on the edge, not knowing if our marriage would survive this rift. One evening he sat down across from me, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Maya, I've called her dozens of times. She doesn't pick up the phone. I don't know what's going on. I clutched my teacup, feeling the heat burning my fingers. Maybe she's embarrassed, James. Or maybe she's waiting for everyone to forget. He shook his head. She's not like that. She always comes back fighting. I felt a chill in my stomach. He was right, Elizabeth was not the type to go down quietly. And that meant the storm was still to come. The tension between us was growing. James was getting irritable, throwing out phrases like, "If you hadn't made that scene, we would have already settled everything." I was biting my lip to keep from exploding, but one day I couldn't help myself. Resolved? You would have believed her excuses again, and I would have been left with her hatred in my pocket. He stood up, his voice rising. She's my mom, Maya. I can't just throw her out of my life. I looked at him and my voice was as cold as steel. And I'm your wife. And she hates me because of who I am. Do you see that or not? He was silent, but his eyes were screaming. He didn't know what to do. Then the relatives came. Tom called, his voice quiet but firm. Maya, I talked to Liz. She's depressed, she won't leave the house. You need to come over and talk to her. I felt anger flare up. I have to. She hurt me, Tom, not me. He sighed. I know. But for James' sake. I hung up the phone. For James' sake. Everyone wanted me to give up for him, but no one asked me what I needed. And then I found something that changed everything. James had left his phone on the table and I saw a text message, an old one from Elizabeth, a few months before dinner. Your wife thinks she's special, but she's just a street kid. You need to open your eyes. I froze. This was not a one-time thing. She had written this before and he hadn't told me. I threw the phone at him when he came into the room. You knew. You knew she was thinking about me and you didn't say anything. He looked at the screen, his face turning white. Maya, I didn't want to upset you. Didn't want to upset me? I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I held them back. You hid it from me. You let her hate me behind my back. He stepped toward me, but I stepped back. I didn't know how to say it. I thought I could handle it. I laughed bitterly, painfully. Handle it? You didn't even see how she crushed me. He lowered his head and I saw tears in his eyes. I see now, he whispered. It was a turning point. James finally understood, not completely but enough to stop and really look at me. We talked for a long time that night. He admitted that he had been turning a blind eye to her behavior because he didn't want a conflict. I told him I couldn't live with someone who chose his mom over me, and he promised, I'm with you, Maya. I will talk to her. But give me time. I nodded, but inside I knew that time would not heal this. Only actions can. The next day he went to see her. He returned hours later, exhausted but with fire in his eyes. She was crying, saying she didn't mean it. But I told her that if she doesn't change her attitude towards you, I won't be a part of her life. I felt something in my chest melt. He had chosen me, not completely, but it was a start. And I knew that we had not yet reached the end of this war. Elizabeth would not give up so easily. But now I was not alone. 3 months have passed since that dinner, and the world around me has changed quietly but irreversibly. Elizabeth disappeared from our lives, like a shadow that dissolved into darkness. James never called her again, never went to see her, and I could see it eating at him, but he held on. He and I started over, not perfectly but honestly. I still felt the pain, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. I learned to breathe through it, to live with it like a scar reminiscent of a battle. And I thought it was over, until one day she knocked on our door. Those 3 months were strange. At first I was waiting for her call, her anger, her attempt to get James back. But the silence continued and I began to get used to it. James became closer, we talked more than in all the years of our marriage. He admitted how blindly he had been protecting her, and I could see him struggling to be with me for real. We went to a therapist and it helped slowly, painfully, but we were moving forward. My relatives stopped pressuring me, although I could hear them whispering, Elizabeth doesn't leave the house, Tom is worried. I did not feel guilty. She had chosen this. And then that day came. I was at home drawing a sketch for a client when there was a knock. James was at work, so I went to open the door. And there she was, Elizabeth. Her face was pale, her eyes were sunken, but there was the same fire in them that I had always seen. I froze, my heart pounding. Maya, we need to talk, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't invite her inside. Talk here, I said, holding the door half open. She looked at me and I saw her lips pursed. I came to apologize. I raised my eyebrows, waiting. She continued, what I wrote was a mistake. I was angry, I wasn't thinking. But you destroyed my family. I felt anger flare up, but I held it back. You destroyed it yourself, Elizabeth. You hated me from day one. She shook her head. I didn't hate you. I was afraid you would take James away from me. Afraid? I laughed coldly, sharply. You called me a slut because you were afraid? Did you treat me like dirt for years because of that? Her eyes glistened with tears, but I didn't back down. You think an apology will heal this? You're not even ashamed, you just want him back. She stepped closer and I could feel her voice trembling. He's my son, Maya. I can't lose him. I stood there looking at her and something inside me clicked. I could have screamed, kicked her out, but instead I said, he is your son, but I am his wife. And I'm not leaving. If you want to be a part of his life, you will have to respect me. Not fake, not for show, but for real. She blinked as if she hadn't expected it. Then she nodded, saying quietly, I'll try. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't ready. Not completely. She left and I closed the door. My heart was pounding, but I felt calm. I didn't forgive her, not yet, maybe I never will. But I gave her a chance, not for her sake but for my own. When James came back I told him, He hugged me, his hands shaking. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. I pulled away and looked him in the eyes. "I did it for us. But if she crosses the line again, I'll end it for good." A few more weeks passed. Elizabeth called James briefly, cautiously. She didn't write to me, didn't come to see me. I didn't know if she would change or if this was just a pause before a new war. But I was no longer afraid. I found my strength not in shouting, not in t-shirts, but in saying enough. My marriage became stronger because James and I were looking in the same direction. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would not disappear. Standing on the balcony watching the sunset, I thought about her. Would she be able to change? Would she come back with more poison? I didn't know. But I was ready, not for battle but for life. My life. And that was enough.